Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where you can be, belong, and become the very best version of yourselves. So, wherever you are joining us, whether you're driving, you're on your couch, or with your family, wherever you are, we just want to let you know this is safe space. And so, what we do here every week is we look at the actual context of this ancient book we call the Bible, this Jewish piece that's filled with so much beauty, so much depth. What we do is we don't just read it from our perspective today. We ask questions of it because we respect it, right? So we look at the cultural context. We look at who the author was, who the audience was. We look at the words. We look at everything. We go really, really deep. And so that's what we do here at Ethos. And so this portion of this, Ethos Online, we do these videos every week because we think, again, what we are doing here, this deep, deep study into this book, it is so applicable right now. Right now, in the midst of so much change, so much division, all of it, this is a perfect time for this book to really scream out some beautiful messages. And so today we continue our study in the book of Genesis. And again, the book of Genesis is a beautiful, beautiful telling. And not to be mistaken for a history book, right? This is not a history book. This piece, which is a combination of a bunch of stories, narratives, again, poetry, poetic musings, all of this together. This was not written as a piece of a history so that they don't forget who, all their stories. This was bigger. The reason for it is because, again, they are marched hundreds of miles on foot after they've been captured by the Babylonians. And when they get to Babylon, they notice all these other civilizations that have also been conquered. And most civilizations, most tribes, these small nomadic tribes, what they do is they would say, oh, their God, right? Their nation beat our nation, our gods. So they must be more powerful. So we will essentially assimilate, we'll take on their values, their stories, their gods, right? Their king. Now, what's interesting about this Hebrew nation, this small tribe of people, they said, no, we're not going to assimilate. We're going to keep our Hebrew roots, right? And so this is a response in the middle of this Babylonian captivity. They respond with Torah. And Torah, this beautiful compilation, right? Again, poetry, mythology, prophetic musings, warnings, lots and lots of metaphor and story, right? All of this put together so they learn and they remember who they are. That was the point. That was the reason. And so, like every week that we do, we read this again. It's a reminder of what this book is, right? And I think most of you can probably quote this by heart, right? The Torah is a complete narrative of Israel miniaturized through its tellings. So remember, every time you read a story and a new character comes in, Joseph, Abraham, Moses, right? Adam, these characters all are pictures of Israel and really a deeper picture of humanity. And so when you view it that way, knowing there's a deeper metaphor here and that there's something to be learned, we, thousands and thousands of years later, Americans, Russians, wherever you're joining us from, what we notice here is there is a deeper human story here that we can pick up years and years later. This book was not intended for us, was it? Yeah, but we can choose to find deep meaning from it because it's a beautiful story about what it looks like to be more human. So Genesis chapter 6 is where we are now. And so when you move through Genesis chapter 6, remember Noah, right? We're in the story of Noah. And again, Noah is the character who found favor with the Lord, right? And again, this idea is Noah is the picture of there's a rest coming. In the middle of all the chaos, all the brokenness, all the change, all the turbulation, all of it, rest steps in, right? There's a figurehead that steps in and begins bringing in the idea that we're going to find order again. And this is the person of Noah. And really, it's a bigger picture of Israel. Israel's supposed to be the presence of the divine here on earth that brings in peace and restoration when there's so much chaos and brokenness, because that's how they viewed their God. Beautiful, right? So here we go. Genesis chapter 6 17 through 22. We're going to read through those verses today. And again, not many verses, right? But again, we understand there's so much depth in just these couple of verses that it would be painful not to take time, right? We'd be robbing it of its value if we just skipped over and went chapter by chapter. There's so much beauty in all of these verses. So here we go. And I, behold, am bringing the flood, water upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which there is the spirit of life. From beneath the heavens, all that is upon the earth will perish, right? I will set up my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons, and your wife and your sons' wives with you. And all living things of all flesh, 2 of each you shall bring into the ark to preserve alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the fowl after its kind, and the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing upon the ground after its kind, 2 of each shall come to you to preserve life. And you take for yourself of every food that is eaten, and gather it for you, and it shall be for you and for them to eat. And Noah did according to all that God had commanded him. So he did. So I want you to notice from the very get-go, this is a story about in the middle of chaos, life begins to find order again. Yeah, and we've heard the story, haven't we? We've already heard it a couple times. This is the story of creation, right? This is the story of Israel. In the middle of chaos, in the middle of brokenness, the divine steps in and begins creating some order. And out of that order, there will be life. Right? So again, knowing this is a story that reflects the bigger story, right? It's a repeat of another story we've heard before, but it's the bigger story of Israel. The whole thing makes sense. And again, we can apply it in so many beautiful ways today when we understand this. Some of us are in so much disarray right now. Some of us are saying, yes, finally some order. Some of us are saying, chaos. Whichever side of the spectrum, wherever you are, this story can be applied, can't it? Out of the chaos, out of the brokenness, there will be order. Order always steps in, especially when the divine is connected, right? Whenever you see this Hebrew story told, the divine, the hero steps in, and there's a moment where order begins to happen. And so let's look at this here. Look at just this first portion of the verse. And I, behold, am bringing the flood, water upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which there is the spirit of life. From beneath the heavens, all that is upon the earth will perish, right? This sounds like angry God from above, right? This is angry God. I'm mad at you. Now I'm just going to wipe you off the face of the earth. Now, many people will attempt to say, yeah, but that's not really who God is. And they'll try to keep it literal. And so they'll have to do a lot of interesting, weird loops, and they'll have to use jumps of logic, and it just gets a little weird. Well, because God loved them, He had to destroy them so that He could keep all the. Again, you go down certain rabbit holes, and it gets weird, right? I think the best way to understand this is probably the simplest way. Almost always is. We have to remember during this time period, ancient people, this is how they view natural disasters, right? When there is a tornado, that means one of the gods is up there and he's doing this, right? And he's, when there is too much rain, the god's spitting, he's urinating, whatever, I don't know. The gods are angry, right? And so they send natural disasters. Today, right, when we talk about floods, you don't see the newscaster getting on and saying, weatherman, talk to me here. And the weatherman says, yes, today we've really torqued off, Zeus. And Zeus has been throwing down a lot of lightning bolts here, so you watch it as you're going down the one. No, right? That's not how we talk about natural disasters, not how we talk about floods. Because we understand now, today, we see the universe. We understand science a little differently, don't we? We understand some things that back then, during that ancient time periods, they didn't. And so when we talk about floods today, we'll talk about flash floods, coastal floods, urban floods, river floods, ponding floods. We'll talk about why there's flooding, right? We know these things. Back then, they did not have that knowledge. And so what did they do? Well, this was a warning from the gods. It's just that simple. The Hebrews are no different. They did not have the scientific method. They did not see that there, for them again, there were waters above, there were waters below, and between, there's a firmament. All of this. That's how they viewed the world. Today, if they were to write stories, create narratives, it would be very, very different. But this is what they knew, right? And so this is how they tell the story. When you begin to get too literal with it, it gets a little weird. But just remember the context and the culture. Yeah? Okay, good. Let's keep going. And I will set up my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons and your wives with you. Covenant. This word often gets a little misused too. There's a lot of mileage depending on the tribe you're from. Covenant is actually a really beautiful word here. Covenant, again, understanding their idea of what God was, right? Especially the ancient people, how they viewed their God. This idea of a covenant, basically, it's saying there's not going to be a divide between us and our God anymore. Think about that for a minute. Ancient people felt that there was like this, there was us and then there's the gods. But what this covenant, this word covenant means is there's no longer a divide. We can be one. That was the idea. I am setting up a covenant, a peace agreement where we're no longer at odds. Actually, it's no longer me up here, you down here. It's together. We're together. And that idea of a covenant is really rather beautiful, especially when you begin considering who Jesus is, right? The messianic figure later on in the New Testament. It all begins to make sense. I make a new covenant with you. Someone's smiling as they're listening to this. It's really, really beautiful. So covenant. Let me keep going. And all living things of all flesh, two of each, get onto the ark, right? There's a lot to unpack here. So I'm going to unpack this a little bit. There's a lot of stuff happening there on this ark. There's a lot of animals, right? There's a lot of plant life, right? There's a lot of food. All of that is going to be on this ark. So I want to share with you, when you begin to move in a very literal perspective of the story, I think there's a very real danger of not just looking silly, right? but actually missing the point entirely of the story. We actually rip it of its beauty and its value. When you attempt to make this literal, you not only look non-scientific, you kind of miss the real beauty of what the authors are trying to tell their people. And so consider a couple of these ideas, because again, people will tell me, well, why can't it be literal? Well, there's a couple problems when you go literal. Let me just share with you. I'm gonna pull from right now. I'm gonna share with you some architecturists their ideas. There's a boat builder who has a couple things to say about some of the problems. I'm gonna share a physicist will share some ideas. There's a lot of interesting concepts I'm gonna share with you from just all the different readings I've done. So let me share with you the first problem. If you take this too literally, it gets weird. So think just on a very general place first. Again, some will argue 120, some will argue 82. It only took 80 to 100 years, right? Depending on which version you read and how you want to put the numbers together, to build this huge ark. With how many people? Noah and his sons. We've got 4 individuals. Look at what this one architect says about the flood story taken too literally. He says this: to build a structure comparable in complexity and scale to the pyramids of Egypt that took the very advanced Egyptian civilization thousands of years and a time frame of 82 years would be a deep jump into lunacy. So what this author's showing here is to build the pyramids, that was a pretty big task, wasn't it? Yeah, they were learning things. They were so advanced to be able to move these huge, gigantic ton and ton of one big brick, one stone. It took tons of physics just to move that thing up this huge pyramid. It was incredible. what they had to do to make these pyramids so complex. It took thousands of years until they had all of them arranged the way they wanted to. It's incredible, right? And the labor force that they had. Um, Interesting, right? They had the very best minds of Egypt all come together. They actually had to live around around the pyramids, and they were given specialty foods and drinks and everything. These architects. Now think about this. What this author is saying is this art to withstand the kind of movement and problematic issues of waters rising here and there and staying afloat and holding all that it has to hold and being as gigantic as it is, to be able to do that, they're saying that would be a miracle. That would be similar to how the Egyptians built the pyramids. This is a complex building structure. And to do it in 82 to 120 years, whatever you want to say there, that would be incredible. It would be lunacy. Right? It's just not doable with 4 people. Sorry, that would seem insane. And that's why, again, taking it literally might be a little bit of a stretch, right? Taking these numbers literally. Another thing that was said about this, this came from a shipbuilding expert, which I find really interesting. I'll share 2 perspectives from him. One on more the physics, and this one just rotting wood in general. I'll just read the very bottom part. It is so basically. Let me read the whole thing. Even if thousands collaborated to build the massive structure, 82 years is still both long and short to effectively finish the task. It's too short because the ship is so big and complex, and gathering the materials alone would have taken many decades. Like, think about that. Just to have the materials to put this together would have taken decades to bring, right? That in itself is interesting. That's hard to believe. It took less than half a millennium, and it's too long. So watch this. It's too short of a time to build the whole thing, but he then brings up, but it's actually too long of a period because as the problem of wood shipbuilding, by the time the later layers of the ark were placed, the earlier wooden pieces would have rotten away already. Right? I never would have thought about that. But yeah, all the sun damage, all of that happening to the earlier pieces, it would have already rotted away. And we see this with vessels today, don't we? Like if you were to build these pieces out of wood, 80, 100 years, that's a long time for this kind of ancient boat to be sitting. By the time you had the one layer done, you'd have had to replace the next. Interesting, right? We don't think about that. Another thing, consider physics. He brings up the laws of physics. There is an upper limit to the possible length of any given wooden ship. Again, I'm not a ship expert, but A.M. Roberts is. So he says this, anything above 300 feet would start to bend and deform under its own weight when put to the test of the sea in actual navigation. Consider the largest wooden ships ever built. The 6-masted schooners required long iron straplings to support them, and even these couldn't resist a lasting voyage even in shallow water, let alone the violent conditions of the flood. And the ark was supposedly over 100 feet even than these. So 100 feet even larger than those schooners, right? So again, they're pointing out this simply would not work as far as physics go. This thing would have bent and broke before the flood would have even come, right? It would not have even been able to withstand just the weight of it alone before the water enters the picture. Interesting, right? Another thing, think about the cargo needs. I found this one fascinating because I've always wondered this. Like, where does the poop go? Right? Like, where does all the food go? You've got the animals, which again, that's a stretch. But then, what about the people and the food for the people and the food for the animals? And how? Because the animals can't eat the other animals. Because then oh crud, there goes that animal. They're extinct now. How do you do it? Right? Cargo needs. So here's what one author wrote: there are millions of species living on the planet, and the story requires at least 2 members of each to make it onto the ark. According to estimates, the conservative number of current species stands at about 8 million, and that not counting the thousands of extinct species during the era. There simply isn't a boat large enough to carry the species, their food sources, and the fauna required to repopulate the world. And remember, this isn't just two, but many of the times you'll see seven, right? Seven of the same species. So again, this, and then connecting the whole idea that there were a bunch of extinct species, right, that we don't even have today. Um, that's a lot of animals on a boat. Um, Huge animals on a boat, right? It just wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't fit if we go too literal. Another one, too few genes. One geologist says this: all animals, humans included, require genetic variation to survive. Human genes were reduced to just the lineage of Noah and his wife, a single line. The same for all other animals. If we take the tale literally, that's absurd. All in all, conservation experts estimate that it takes a minimum of 50 organisms of a single lineage for it to survive, depending on the species. And even that is debatable. 50 leaves no room for error. If only a few were to die, say hitting their head or after violent winds rocked the ark, which must have happened, then that's that. And that's with 50. Twos is simply impossible. In fact, many biologists argue we'd need around 150 specimens to account for minor accidents and far more to account for severe situations. So, if you understand what they're saying, to just keep the lineage of a giraffe, you would have needed at least 50 species of giraffe on the ark for that one to have survived post flood. Interesting, right? That's what we know of biology today. But to have two giraffe, or even just there's seven, that would have been very, very difficult. Impossible. Yeah, fascinating. Last one, cargo needs. And I believe, yeah. Yeah, so again, this idea here, there is just not enough room. There's just not enough room. Where does all the poop go? Right? The species that you would need, all of their food, all of it, there's just not enough room. There's not enough room for all the cargo needs. Again, you and I, when I think about my family going on vacations, we pack that van and we're only going for like 3 days, right? When you consider a flood and you think about this family living 120 days on this ark, it gets very real very quick. It gets very odd to consider having everything you need on that ark, all species, millions of species, all of it, it just begins to fall apart. The literalism, when you go down the road of literalism, we can potentially miss the point and look kind of silly, right? And so here's what one author said, and I find this really interesting. He said, Noah's story makes perfect sense as a folk tale shared by small communities in ancient Hebrews who knew only a few hundred animals and had no clue about biology or genetics. But if we try to take the story literally in the 20th century, we're left with nothing but an absurd fantasy. And so I don't want to leave it negative. I want you to pick consider the beginning of that quote. This is a story told by small communities of ancient Hebrews who again only knew a couple hundred species, right? And so for them there's something deeper going on. It's not about the literalism. They weren't asking about the science. That was never the point, right? To build some huge ark and then try to make stories up of how you would, have made all of them fit and all that. That was never the intention of the story in the first place. Never. The intention, the point of the whole thing was that we might come together, we might read the beauty of the narrative, the campfire story. We read it together and we pick up on this word. Notice this word here. And all living things of all flesh, 2 of each you shall bring into the ark to preserve alive with you. Notice this word, preserve. Preserve. If you are a Hebrew person in the middle of captivity, you hear the word preserve. Understand this. For the Hebrews, You are a nation that has learned how to preserve, haven't you? That word preserve is in your DNA. Preserve, to be a Hebrew, is to show perseverance. You have outlasted nations just by your sheer will. You have outlasted Egypt, Babylon, right? Medo Persia, Greece, Rome. You have outlasted these empires because you have held on to your values. You remembered what it means to be human. And that is why that's why we hold the Bible up so high, because this group of people preserved. They continued on. They did not let these floods, right? The brokenness, the wars, the captivity, they did not allow it to ruin them. They continued on. And so persevere, right, is to be human. Humanity, to be human is to show perseverance. We continue on. We don't give up. That's what it means to be beautifully human. I have a student, and many students, but this one, this one caught me off guard the other day because it's Thanksgiving, and before Thanksgiving break, I had one day with her, and I'm sitting there talking with her before break, and she tells me, life is not always easy for my family. And I said, "Oh, well, how so?" And she said, "Yeah, we haven't had heat for the last 3 months." I said, "Oh, how have you been doing it?" She said, "Well, it's cold." I said, "Yeah, I can imagine." She said, "We huddle up in blankets." And then she kind of giggled a little bit. She said, "We use the oven a lot. We turn the oven on a lot. You can heat a small apartment with an oven pretty well." And she kind of laughed. And I had this sinking feeling that, man, Thanksgiving is coming. And she's going to be in her house cold, probably not with much food. And here I am with all these crazy, stupid complaints about my own life. And here she is making the best. She starts giggling a little bit. "Yeah, you can do a lot with an oven." And then she said, "We do what we have to do. We do what we have to do. It has made us stronger. It's made us stronger." When she said it, it broke my heart, but it also stirred something in me. It reminded me that, like these Hebrews, to be human is to persevere. To be human is to say, I don't give up. This thing that I'm dealing with, the brokenness, the frustration, the lack of heat, right? Whatever it is, this thing's going to pass. And when it does, it's going to make me stronger. I will preserve. I'll preserve. Out of the chaos, there is a chance to become stronger, more human, right? We preserve. We become stronger. And that to me is the beauty of this portion of the story. Out of the ashes, out of the brokenness, there is the promise, this covenant that we are going to preserve. The distinction between God and man, God has said, I've made a covenant. I'm bringing this, I'm leveling the playing field. And we together are going to preserve life. We're going to make it. Yeah, what a beautiful promise. Before the flood hits, the Hebrew people are reminded, hey, we're going to make it. We're going to preserve. It's what we do. It's what it means to be a Hebrew, right? And I would remind you, whatever you're going through, you're going to preserve. You will persevere. You will persevere and you will be stronger. And so how do we take it home? Right? What do we do with this? How do we allow difficulty to make us stronger? Well, here's a couple things to practice. Number one, remember hardships, they're part of life. Hardships are part of life. We hear things about, again, people getting sick, someone critically in the hospital, all of these different situations, all of these things happen, right? Hardships are all part of life. And if we remember, it's part of the thing, right? It can't always be rainbows and butterflies. It's part of the thing. And when we remember it's part of life, we can also remember there's other things too, right? Hardships are part of life. Victories are part of life. Blessings are part of life. It's all part of this thing we're in. Life. Yeah. Number 2, cherish the moment. Take time. Again, we have little control over most of these external circumstances that take place. It's true. But what we do have control over, we can control how we react. And I think for many of us, learning to just stop and say, look, I'm going to take a moment and just enjoy this thing. I'm going to take a moment and enjoy, like, wow, I'm having to like really dig deep right now. Like, take time in some of these moments and say, I'm going to dig deep. I'm going to dig deep. I'm going to cherish it. I'm going to own it. It's going to become who I am. I'm going to dig deep, and I'm just going to be present to the moment. Another idea, you're not your past, right? You are not your past. Our past may have been rocky. Again, no matter the situation, the past does not define us. It shouldn't, right? And so you're not your past habits, nor the story, again, you used to tell yourself. The future, it's a clean slate to become whatever you wish to be, right? And so you're allowed to change your own internal narrative. And so you're not your past. Remember this. In the middle of all of this, you're not your past. So the fourth part, life goes on. Right? In the middle of the brokenness, in the middle of the chaos, life doesn't stop. We don't stop. We continue evolving, moving, growing. And if we can remember, it's going to continue on. This thing is not going to complete. I still have breath in me, right? I can continue on. And then lastly, remember this one, because this one's so good. And I forget it so often. You are not alone. So many times in my own story, people have showed up when I needed them most. And I think for you too, there are probably these moments where no matter how you've been feeling, no matter how alone you might feel, there are others who have gone through similar things, and there are others who are going to continue holding you up. And sometimes it's people you never would have expected. You're not alone in the middle of it. You will make it. You will persevere. You're not alone. Thank you so much for joining us today over this study in Genesis. This was so deep, so rich, and so fun. And so I'll remind you, as always, please consider going to ethos-church.org/donate. Please consider giving this donation. This is tax deductible. And so here, as we're moving toward tax season, consider donating, partnering with us as we continue putting out this really valuable content. And our Ethos Living Room series, this has been so much fun. We'd love to have you join us on this. Twice a month, we come together online. And we discuss different conversations about anything from faith to deconstruction to parenting. We talk about it all. And so join us twice a month where we have these live interactive discussions with people all across the nation. It's so much fun. Email me if you're interested. I'll send you the Zoom link. And as always, click that subscribe button and hit that little bell. It'll notify you every time a new video comes out. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Love you. Hope you will persevere through whatever you're going through. There is hope. You're not alone. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.